And yeah, this has gotten very deep. This is deeper than most of my podcasts, by the way, which is, I actually really like it. It's refreshing. Welcome to Taste. I'm your host, Kelly Kim. Every week, I give you a taste of the on-chain future via yummy conversations with seriously on-chain builders. In this episode, we chat with the man behind the Blue Circle, Jake. Previously, Jake was Chief of Staff and Fund Manager for Balaji Srinivasan. He has a blog called Blog of Jake and also a podcast called Pod of Jake, on which he's had guests like Vitalik Buterin, Cuban and Briam Armstrong. Recently, Jake created Base Colors, an NFT collection for every color on the internet. In this conversation, we talk about his background, authenticity in content creation, pseudonymity, seasonal living, the power of positive thinking, and of course, we delve deeper into Base Colors and how it's onboarding the masses. Bon appetit. Welcome. Jake, it is such an honor to have you on the pod. I've been following your work for a very long time, and I think it's very underrated. Probably one of the most underrated content creators out there, especially in our industry. How are you today?
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's good to be here and doing good.
Awesome. And yeah, we all know that Mexico City couldn't handle our previous conversation, so this is take 2. I think it will sound even more organic and fresh than the previous. So, I mean,
Second time's the charm.
Exactly. The Mexico City tacos can't handle us. So, yeah, I mean, let's get started. You're the creator of Base Colors, an NFT collection that's recently gone quite viral, well, in my echo chamber at least. You also write a blog called Blog of Jake, and you host a podcast called Pod of Jake with some really hard-hitting guests. And yeah, you've done a bunch of cool things in your life. I usually like to start my pod with kind of an intro into like who my guest really is. So, beyond the blue circle, who are you? Let's go back like 4.5 years ago to when you started your whole content creation journey. And yeah, I'd love to explore a little bit more about your history and your background.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me on. I'm a big fan of the show, and I love the taste of all of it. The dollar sign and the taste logo and the website and everything like that. So I'm happy to be on. As far as my story, going back 4.5 years ago, I was coming off a couple years in investment banking. Started my career doing technology mergers and acquisitions, at first in San Francisco for about 1.5 years, and then in New York for several months, all with the same firm, with the same group, just a couple different locations. And after the second year, I decided to leave without knowing what was next. Just kind of took a leap of faith and bet on myself a bit. And, I was comfortable doing that. I was coming off my second year, like I said, and I had just gotten my bonus and my lease in New York was up. And a few pieces just kind of came together. People say that there's like not a right time to do certain big things in life. And I just kind of got lucky. The timing actually worked out really well. And so I decided to, leave my New York apartment and leave my job and go and travel for a little bit. After a few months of that, I was kind of ready to come home and get back to work. I had this like big itch to travel. And, after a few months, I guess it felt scratched and I was ready to come back and kind of get down to business and try to make something for myself. And around that time, I started writing a lot. I ended up publishing a blog post every weekday for 6 or 7 months. I started a Twitter around that time as well. This was like early 2020, late 2019. So right around the time COVID hit, which also, I moved home during that time and lived with my family, with my brother as well. And it was a great sort of unexpected time of, you don't really expect to like move back home after college, at least not once you've moved out if you started at home after college. And so it was a nice surprise to be able to spend some time with family. And obviously people had a really tough time during COVID, but I was fortunate to be able to just write a lot during that time, run a lot, spend a lot of time with my family and just kind of follow my interests. And my interests led me to eventually start the podcast. So that's about after like 6 months of writing, I started podcasting as well. And it was through the podcast that I met Balaji Srinivasan, who I ended up working for a couple of years. People in crypto probably know him. Others who don't, he was the CTO at Coinbase for a while, among a bunch of other things, and just a brilliant guy and awesome to work with. So I was his chief of staff and helped him with his angel investments for a couple of years. And then, about a year ago, decided it was time to move on from that as well. And just kind of, again, kind of bet on myself and followed my interests. And that led me to where I am now, which is very deep in colors, working hard on base colors. And I couldn't tell you exactly how I got here, but having a lot of fun with it and people seem to love it. And I'm loving working on it.
That's an amazing story. I'm a big fan of Balaji. I've devoured his book, The Network State. I feel like he's one of the few people in our time who can really, I mean, this is a really big, I guess, accusation, but I really do think he's like a clairvoyant. Every time he says something, it comes true. Like, I think he said something about COVID, it came true. I trust him. I trust that guy. I think he's very intelligent, and I am extremely jealous that you got to work for him, but also just fascinated because you seem like a guy who just, like, you have certain curiosities and certain goals. Like, once you, I guess, quote unquote, scratch that itch, you move on to your next curiosity, but it's all very intrinsically driven. Like, there's nothing external pushing you to pursue your next venture or project.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what got you into wanting to start a podcast or writing? Was it your travels, or was it always like an itch that you've wanted to scratch?
Yeah, the two things were definitely a little bit different. The blog was first, so I'll start there. You know, I'd never really written all that much before outside of doing so for school. I wrote, you know, what I call a book. It's not published or anything, but after I graduated college, I took a 2-week road trip across America from East Coast to West Coast and everywhere in between, and wrote a book about it afterwards, a week or two, and that's fun and glad to have that. And right now it's just for me and some friends, but maybe one day I'll put it out there with some fictional names or something like that. It's kind of inspired by Jack Kerouac's book On the Road, if you ever heard of it. But that was, you know, writing about my life and sort of the trip and using the trip as a sort of thread to jump off of into various opinions I had on the world and philosophies I have for life and stuff like that. So it was kind of its own little thing, but I'd never just written about whatever I wanted before, and I felt like I had a lot to write about. So I just started doing it. And, you know, there was no like sort of theme or niche for the blog. I just woke up and wrote about whatever I wanted to write about, or went for a run and got back and wrote about whatever I wanted to write about. And when you put yourself on a cadence of having to publish, you know, it's a self-imposed like deadline or whatever, but it's a deadline nonetheless. And I put this pressure on myself to publish every day, or every weekday at least. And so you don't really have the opportunity to like sleep on it or think about it or over edit or anything like that. You kind of just got to get the words down and put them out there. And I'm really glad I did that. I now have this, you know, huge collection of blog posts with all of my thinking from when I was like, whatever I was, 25 years old or something like that, 26 years old. And I think that's just really cool to look back on. Like, I wish, you know, I didn't really have a grandfather like growing up. And I wish like if I could have read my grandfather's blog post or something from when he was 25, that would just be so cool. And that's the beauty of the internet, right? Like, you publish something and it's there forever. If you do it right, it's there forever, especially if you do it on the blockchain. And so that was kind of the writing. And then the podcasting was more so just a desire to, you know, talk to interesting people, have interesting conversations with interesting people. I'd always reached out to people who I kind of had no business talking to and had some success there. So I was confident that I could get some good guests. Transparently, I sort of underrated how much I would be able to do that. I've been able to have some really awesome people on. And it's just been a great way to meet people. Obviously, I've built a little bit of an audience, and even though it's not a huge audience by any means, it's a super high quality audience. Like, I'm continuously shocked by the quality of people who either reach out to me proactively, or I'll reach out to people and find out that they've listened to my podcast and they're a big fan. And it's like crazy to me every time that happens. Like, it doesn't get old. And in addition to that, it's just like a cadence for learning. Like, every week I have someone interesting to prepare for. I prepare, like, that's my favorite part. I don't spend any time on post-production. It's all preparation and then obviously the conversation. And I learned a ton in preparing for all these people and, you know, just kind of immersing myself in their perspective, listening to all podcasts they've done before, reading all their blog posts, learning about their company, learning about whatever it is that they're obsessed with. And typically I'm at least interested in the thing, or else I wouldn't be interested in them in the first place. So it's been a ton of fun. And both the blog and the podcast, like, I don't know, you know, in a given year, I might not write that much, or I might not do that many podcasts. But over the course of my life, I feel like some years I might do a couple episodes and a couple blog posts, and other years I might do 50 of each, and that's fine. But they're like these infrastructural pieces that I expect to write and podcast for the rest of my life.
I love that. I especially love how you talk about the blog. You know, it really is, you're writing for your future listeners, right? You're writing for your granddaughter, your grandson. It's even fun, like, reading your blogs, I guess, like 2 years after you write them, right? Because there's so much that changes in that time. Going back to kind of your traveling, in one sentence, what kind of traveler are you? Just curious, because you have a lot of thoughts on your mind. I'm wondering how you view the world when you're on the road versus how I view the world, right?
Yeah, a couple interesting things on traveling. First, just a note on the writing. I actually, first and foremost, I write for myself. I think like writing is a great way to clarify your own thinking and to sort of leave notes for your future self, like you said. And so if other people benefit from that, or my kids or my grandkids or their kids or whatever benefit from that, that's all amazing. And like, I love it. And it's amazing to see there's like a map through the dashboard on the blog that shows people around the world. And people from 50 different countries are reading these posts. And I'm like, even if it's not a big number, it's just like that global nature of it is just crazy. So that's just a note on the writing. On the traveling, what guides me in traveling? I guess it's just comes down to like what's interesting at the time. And so, I was fortunate to travel Europe quite a bit in college. I studied abroad out there and then got to travel all around sort of in the process over that semester. So I felt like I kind of had seen a lot of Europe, and I started the trip actually with my girlfriend and now fiance. We went to Italy for a week, which was basically my favorite country in the world to visit, and kind of a known commodity, a comfortable place to start after taking this big, risky feeling leap. And then from there, she went home and continued onward. I went to Paris for like 10 days and stayed in a hostel. And like I had never stayed in a hostel before really, so I was like kind of nervous about it. And then like the first night, there's like innocent, pretty young like girl in the bunk. I'm like a 6'3", like pretty big guy. And I'm like, all right, I have nothing to worry about here. I'm going to be just fine. So Paris was a lot of fun. And I probably should have done it the other way around, where you go to Paris with the girlfriend and maybe Italy on your own, but it was fun to be in Paris alone nonetheless. And then I went to Copenhagen after that. I didn't have the chance to go there when I was abroad, and Copenhagen was super cool. I had read a book about basically like the world's #1 restaurant at the time. I think it's called like Noma or something like that. And it's in Copenhagen. And like I said, before the podcast or anything, I always reached out to people when I wanted to. And so I reached out to the author just with a cold email, and he ended up sending me like an agenda of all these restaurants to go to. So I went and like ate incredibly well in Copenhagen for a few days. And the reason I went there actually was to catch a flight to then go to Tokyo to meet up with a buddy of mine who was doing a much more deliberate, much better planned world travel for, I think he was gone for like a year, and able to meet with him for the Japan leg. And we traveled Japan for a few weeks. And so just kind of curiosity, like I'd always been really interested in Japan and like respected the culture and wanted to check it out. And so that was a ton of fun. And then after about 3 weeks with him, he was like 3 months into this year long of travel and clearly had a bigger itch for traveling than I did. But I was like, I'm pretty good. I'm ready to go back to the States and I want to work. I want to sort of like make the best use of this time that I've earned for myself and see what I can do with it. And then that kind of turned into everything else.
Yeah, wow. Japan is amazing. It's definitely one of the few places where I'm like, this really feels like an entirely different world. They're just in their own element. It's an insane place to go. I think especially if you're traveling solo, first of all, it's super safe. And then there's this like, I don't know how to describe, there's a certain tranquility about the country that makes you want to just be zen, and reflect on the deepest parts.
I feel like they really have a culture of excellence in like everything that they do, whether it's like food or what, like a tea ceremony, like all of these things. And I really respect just like the quality bar that they hold themselves to. And obviously I'm like sort of stereotyping and generalizing, but in general, as a culture, I think that's like a pretty fair assessment. And then one other thing that was really valuable about this time, my buddy who I met up with, he was sort of like budgeting for a year of traveling. And so he was living very inexpensively. I mentioned, I got my first hostel under my belt in Paris, but then it was hostel hopping all throughout Japan and spending like, 30, 40, $50 a day, including like hostel food, travel, whatever else. And so I guess like a cleanse from banking where I was in there for 2 years, and very quickly you start making more money and spending more money. And eventually you get the golden handcuffs, same as in banking or big tech or any of these companies, where it becomes very difficult to leave when you sort of become dependent on this high spending lifestyle. And so I was able to sort of like reset and recalibrate my spending habits, which was really nice, and got used to just realizing like I can spend a very little amount of money on a daily basis, including my place, in this case a hostel, but when I got back home, like rent and whatever. And it doesn't really move the needle on like happiness or anything. Like you don't need to spend a lot of money to be happy. So that was a really valuable lesson as well. That kind of was a useful reset for starting over after banking.
For sure. I think that's something that traveling does to you. It kind of lifts an entire weight and kind of sheds away what, you're surprised at what you can live with or what you can live without. Really makes you a lighter being in a sense.
Yeah. Also, I have a hot take on this in terms of like literally not having a lot. I had like an away suitcase, like a carry-on that, it's like a roller carry-on suitcase or whatever. And I know like backpacking, quote unquote, is like the thing, and everyone likes to get their big backpack, but I'm a big fan of the roller suitcase. It's just, you never have trouble with it. Like it's just as easy to carry around unless you're really like hiking and camping or whatever. The roller suitcase works perfectly. So shout out to Away for making a great bag for my travels.
Please sponsor this pod. No jokes. Yeah, I mean, let's circle back to like your content creator persona. One thing I've noticed about sifting through your content and just reading it, listening to it, consuming it, it's very you. Like it has a very strong sense of your voice. And I think, you know, because you don't have these like clickbaity titles, I actually was really drawn to it and fixated on it. But I can see how maybe the mass audience like wouldn't necessarily, I don't know, spread it to go viral. I mean, you have had a few viral posts, but yeah, my whole point is that your content is very authentic and genuine, and I can like sense that you're not writing for anyone else. It's really just whatever is inside of you or your brain is typed out and I guess like sometimes immortalized onto the blockchain, but that's why I appreciate it. And your brand as well, you know, the whole blue circle, I appreciated it for sure. I think some people might look at it and be like, what is this? Can you tell us a little more about how you turned into a blue circle? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, there's a few things. I think, first of all, if someone's reaction is, what is this? That's actually pretty good because most people, they see a logo and they don't think anything of it. So to the extent that it makes someone
Right.
stop and ask a question, that's pretty good actually. But it's actually watching, I'm a New York Jets fan, and I was watching the Jets maybe like, I don't remember what week of the season it was, but like somewhere in the middle of the season, and they're losing to a team that hadn't won a game yet all season. And I'm like, all right, what am I doing wasting my time watching this garbage? And I was like, I'd been thinking about starting a blog, and I was like, all right, I'm going to start the blog right now. I'm going to stop watching the game. I'm going to write my first blog post, and I'm going to write a blog post about being a fan of the Jets, the Mets, and the Knicks, which are all like pretty brutal franchises to like be a fan of, though it builds a bit of character. And so I wrote, because you just get used to losing, and you always sort of stay optimistic, even though you have no reason to be optimistic. And so I sort of wrote the blog post on that. And part of that was like, taking the pressure off of the quote unquote first post. Like you feel like it has to be like so good or so special. And I was like, I'm just going to write about being a Jets fan. And like, there's no pressure on that. Like I'm going to get it out of the way and then I'm going to write the second post tomorrow or whatever. So I did that. And in order to do that, I needed to like have a website and I needed to have a logo, or at least I wanted to have like a logo of some kind. And so I tried like jakesblog.com and it was taken. And so I went with blogofjake.com, and that led to podofjake.com and everything else, which is kind of funny. And then the logo, I wanted to do something that was, simple, and if I could, like sort of fundamental. And my favorite color was blue, so I picked like the most fundamental blue, which is the hex code 0000FF, which ended up being kind of like a meaningful thing, even though I had no idea I was going to start an NFT collection for colors at that time. But I picked a pretty good blue. And circle was like kind of the most fundamental shape, I thought, and it also is what you see when you look at like a profile picture on Twitter, pretty much anywhere else. So I figured a circle was a better shape, where if you do a square, it's going to get like cut off on the edges or whatever. And so I just went with it. And then, defaults can be kind of sticky. So that was kind of my default logo. And I liked it and I never found a reason to change it. So that's still what it is.
Yeah, it's crazy because I mean, I work in marketing, in crypto, and it seems to me like the default color for like any, for example, base or any crypto company, it's blue. I don't know if you like had any link to that or inspiration from that, or did they draw inspiration from you perhaps? But this blue is a very striking and beautiful blue that reminds me of my industry, which is insane. But okay, like I like it. It's simple, it's eye-catching, and for some reason it shouts mystery, or it shouts, like when I see it, I'm like, okay, I'm about to get into something deep. I'm gonna pay attention to what I'm reading or listening to.
Yeah, I'm glad. I couldn't impose what people would think of it or whatever. But one other thing I did think about was like, if I can do enough to sort of get noticed or whatever and do this for a long time, then if people start to associate the blue dot with me, like how cool would that be to have just such a simple thing? It's not like some logo with a bunch of random whatever, like it's just a blue dot. And if you see that blue dot and you think of me, like I've won. And so kind of been part of it as well, as like picking something very simple, very fundamental. And if some people see it as like mysterious, that's fine. If some people see it as, crypto leaning, that's fine too. None of those things were intended, but I'll take whatever I can get.
Nice. It's very much like the art world, right? You want people to interpret it how they want to interpret it, as long as it's memorable and as long as they appreciate it in some way.
Exactly.
I like that. And I mean, the fact that you're saying you want people to associate the blue dot with you ties a lot into kind of your pseudonymous persona on the internet. What's the story behind that? Like, why not dox yourself as the Jake, you know?
Yeah. When I started, there's like a sort of a bunch of reasons, and some of them I had up front, and others I've sort of developed and realized over time. This is sort of a pattern I've actually noticed where I don't know if it's just me or if other people have this as well, but I will make a decision for some reason or maybe a couple of reasons. And then as I stick with that, over the years to follow, I find other reasons that also support it. And maybe it's like sort of like a confirmation bias or something, but I try not to be too biased, and I just kind of get lucky a lot of times and realize that I just sort of have added conviction over time in an initial decision. And so a silly example of that is like with the blue dot, for example. I learned about Carl Sagan's like pale blue dot thing about, he took a picture from like really far away from Earth, and the Earth just looked like a pale blue dot. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I want to like attach that to the meaning behind my blue dot now. But obviously, I didn't even know about it when I started. And so on Pseudonymity, the original reason was pretty simple, at least as far as I can recall, which is that I had like, at the time I had no Twitter. I had like an Instagram and like a Snapchat, and I just quit banking. And so if I was going to start this blog, like I just didn't want to do it under my full name. I didn't want people from my job, like, this is like investment bankers. It's like everyone's, what private equity firm did you go to? And like, how fast are you getting promoted? It's like massive groupthink and credential based and prestige based and all this. And I don't want people going and reading about, I'm writing about being a Jets fan or whatever. Like, I just don't need people seeing that. And so I wanted sort of to preserve this privacy. And in a way, I think pseudonymity actually encourages authenticity because you don't have to worry about what people think. And so I wasn't worried about what my old colleagues would think. I wasn't worried about what people from high school would think. I was just free to write about whatever I wanted to write about. And that was the initial reasoning.
Nice.
And then later, I sort of realized, there's a bunch of reasons really, but another one is that I think people really underestimate how small of a following it takes to lose your ability to have anonymity in public. And so what I mean by that is like, you can have like 50,000, 100,000 followers. Like it doesn't take 10 million followers. If you have 100,000 followers and you're like, an American guy or girl, like have a pretty American following, like 50% or whatever, those people are likely to be in city, and you're like tech focused, crypto focused. Those people are likely to be like, a lot of them are going to be in, New York, Miami, San Francisco, LA, whatever. And so if you have 50,000 followers, 100,000 followers, and you have your profile picture as a headshot of yourself, you're going to walk around in New York and you're going to see like people are going to recognize you. It's like no doubt. And the way that I know that really is besides seeing people with that level of following who have told me that and like confirmed that, I just know like how many people do I know from my life? Like, I don't know, maybe a couple thousand, a few thousand who I recognize and they recognize me. And I run into people in New York. Like it happens, it's not like all the time, but I'm at a restaurant, I see someone I know. I'm at a bar, I see someone I know. I'm on the street, I see someone I know. I lived in Philadelphia for a little bit, which isn't even like one of these main cities. And I ran into a friend of mine 3 separate times inside of like 6 months just because we were kind of in the same area or whatever. And like we didn't plan it or anything. And so that type of serendipity is like kind of a good thing if you run into someone that you want to run into. But if you have 50,000 followers, 100,000 followers, and you're just trying to go, grab a bagel in the morning without anyone seeing you, then like you can't really do that if you have your, your headshot as your bio. So I like the privacy element. I like the freedom to write about whatever I want to write about, talk about whatever I want to talk about. And they might judge you if you look a certain way or whatever. I don't really have anything to hide. I'm like a pretty normal looking guy. But if I did like, or whatever, like people will just judge like if you're tall, if you're short, if you're dark, if you're light, if you have glasses, if you have long hair, if you have a mustache, whatever. People will make like certain judgments, but people can't judge me that way on the internet. They just see my ideas and they see what I do, and it just is what it is. And I really like that.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome thing that granted that ability, right? Like with the internet, we can be pseudonymous and still be recognized for our ideas and what we actually do. I'm curious because most creators, when they put their ideas out, they're looking for certain things, right? And one of them might be, fame or recognition. When you embarked, on this journey, what was your end goal? What did you envision this turning into?
I didn't really have a goal, honestly, and I still really don't. I just kind of try to make the best decisions with what I have in front of me for what to do today, tomorrow, this week, this month, and maybe over the course of a year. But I don't really think too far beyond that. I kind of trust that everything will kind of connect in the future. And if I just keep doing the best thing that I can think to do at a given time, everything will work out. So like I said, I tried to sort of build these, to the extent that I had a plan or a goal, building these infrastructural pieces around things that I knew that I like to do, or actually over this time found that I like to do, like writing and podcasting, building ways that I could do those easily for the rest of my life. I now have like this life advice thing as well, where people can like click a link and sign up for a call. And I have like my favorite type of call in the world, which is basically talking with people about big decisions at like inflection points in their life. And so finding these things, whether they're more popular, like blogging or podcasting, or more niche, like having a life advice call, that I basically would like to do at least with some of my time, maybe not in a given year, but over the course of many years, as at least like sort of a side thing, or a hobby or whatever, and building the infrastructure to be able to do those very easily. I guess that's sort of a part of my thinking.
I like that. I think it's really rare to find that in people. Most people want their, their podcast or channel to blow up, right? And then I don't know, I guess that's kind of their end goal, but for you it's more of like a deeper mission within yourself. I'm curious, like for someone who thinks of every day, like takes every day as it is, what's the first thing you think of or do when you wake up in the morning? And I guess, like, do you have a way to wind down after a day to maintain the sort of optimism about the next day? Say you had a really bad day, or, you have a hard week coming up. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I have some trouble with the winding down part, but on the mornings part, I guess the broader, like zoomed out way to think about it for me is that I think of life like pretty seasonally. And so people can think of seasonal living, quote unquote, as a simple version that has to do with the seasons. Like, I live in New York for 9 months, and then I go and I live in Florida for 3 months or something like that. That's seasonal living in like a basic sense. But maybe a next level to that is like, well, I spend the summers and like the spring and the fall, like working really hard on whatever it is. And then in the winters, I actually like to like go into the mountains and I like to write. Like the winter is like my writing time, and I'm much more social in the summer, and I'm much more of an introvert or whatever, like monk mode or whatever in the winter. And so that's like sort of another version of seasonal living. And for me, one of the things that I found kind of rotates seasonally is how sort of structured my days are. And so I'll have times where, like several months ago, I would wake up, pretty much every day or 5 days a week at least, and get up right out of bed, go for a run, 3 mile run, finish at the beach, go in the water, lay on a lounge chair or whatever for 10 or 20 minutes to dry off, and, come back up and shower and be ready to start my day. And that feels great. Like that's an amazing way to start the day. But I wouldn't want to start all of my days that way. Like you see a David Goggins or something who's like this super disciplined guy who's like running, 1,000,000 miles. And I respect it, but I get bored. I think, change is sort of a necessary component of life. And so the seasonality sort of like helps to introduce that variance. And so I'll go through these very rigid times, but right now I'm waking up and I'm basically like, there is no morning routine. I'm just going and I'm getting to work. The morning is the best time for me to do anything, whether it's working out, or writing, or really anything. And so I try to make good use of it, but at the same time, I try not to put too much pressure on like, I have to do this or I have to do that. And I guess one more thing that I'd be kind of remiss not to mention, I haven't been doing it lately, but for the better part of the last probably 5, 6, 7 years, I journal a lot. I write one page. It's not intended to be something like super meaningful or whatever, but I try to do it first thing in the morning, or in the case where I was like running, I would do it after I got back from my run. And the point of it was like very explicit. It's not like people can journal for all sorts of reasons that they could be helpful in all sorts of ways, especially like reflecting and stuff like that. But I don't really use it for any of that. I used it to basically be as intentionally positive as possible. So I just write positive stuff, and I didn't care what it was, just like stream of consciousness. I started off with the same sentence every day so that it was, no friction to just starting, and then naturally just kind of wrote from there. I fill one page. It takes about 2 minutes. It's like a pretty small notebook. I feel like it helps to build the muscle memory within your brain, or like build the grooves within your brain of thinking positively. And I don't know, for me personally, I think thinking positively and just being a positive mindset person has been a huge benefit in my life. And so I try to sort of train that, if you will. Just a few minutes a day, I think, is enough.
Nice. What time do you wake up?
Again, it kind of varies. Recently, like 6:30.
Oh, wow. Wow. 6:30 I think that's the perfect time. I love mornings too. Is the positivity journaling working? Do you think it's something that everyone should practice if they can?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that really turned me into having like changed my mindset to be positive, I think, was in college. I had a pretty bad freshman year for a number of reasons. One of which was, I had, freshman, you have like the last pick of classes, right? And for like registration. And not only was I like a freshman with last pick, but there was some like system error that, to no fault of my own, I was like locked out of registering at the same time as everyone else. And so I literally had next to no choices for what classes I wanted to take. And I was in a class called like Muslim Saints and Sinners, and a class called like Women's Autobiographies. I was like the only guy in the class, so they would constantly ask me for like the male perspective on whatever it was. And I was like, I'm not like speaking on behalf of all males here. And so it was just a bad year. There's a bunch of other stuff. My room was moldy, so I was like sick all year. It was just terrible. And I knew I needed a fresh start. So I applied to a bunch of schools to transfer and ended up basically making an agreement with one of those schools to defer my acceptance year to give me the opportunity to try to start this company that I wanted to do, like based on this idea that I was pretty excited about. And I basically went into that year and I was, look, all my friends are in school. I'm doing this like different thing. And, you know, this could be pretty lonely. Like this could be pretty miserable, or it could be great. And it's kind of up to me. No one else is really, it's not up to anyone else. And I made the best of it and I had a great year. The company didn't work out, but that year just like completely changed my life. I got into a better school afterwards, just from probably my essays. I had previously gotten rejected from the school with the same grades, same SATs, everything like that. So I loved I went back to school after that year and I loved, my experience in school and everything like that. And so I look back, if I could have like chosen how my freshman year would go, I never would have chosen this like miserable year. But I'm really glad in retrospect that it happened, because it put me on this path and I wouldn't rather be on any other path. So that helped me, just like that lived experience really helped me to see that like, even if something seemingly bad happens, it might be for the best in the long run. And you can't really know whether that's going to be true or not, but I think if you believe it to be true, you'll just constantly be looking for ways to make the best out of things. And I think that's a very healthy way to approach life.
I 100% agree. I think your brain processes like what it sees according to like what it has consumed previously. And that actually kind of like ties into how you were saying now you see the meaning of the blue circle in a lot of places that you wouldn't have previously seen before, because now you have this association, you're noticing it, like choosing to notice it. Likewise, if you choose to notice like positive things, you can always flip an uncomfortable situation onto the bright side. I really like that way of thinking. And yeah, this has gotten very deep. This is deeper than most of my podcasts, by the way, which is, I actually really like it. It's refreshing. I want to move on, just weary of time, to like kind of your idea of seasonal living. I understand that this season is a little bit more colorful, I guess, than your other seasons with base colors. So if you could tell me all about it, where did this idea come from? Also curious why it's base colors and not colors of Jake, as you previously said. And what was that journey like building this?
Yeah, so the idea in general for an NFT collection for every color, every digital color, every color on the internet, whatever you want to call it, that's something that I thought of a few years ago, probably around the time of, like the big NFT hype cycle in like 2021 when like Bored Apes was big and all of that. And so NFTs were top of mind for people and I was kind of paying attention. I wasn't like super interested. I generally gave the benefit of the doubt to the idea that NFTs were going to be huge in the future, but that most all, if not all, projects that were created at that time would probably go to zero, or maybe save for a few special ones or whatever. Is going to be kind of like a power law thing, and most of the good ideas were probably going to be developed later in the future. And so I wasn't like huge in NFTs, and I certainly wasn't like seeking to build an NFT project explicitly or anything like that, but just from thinking about interesting ideas, I'm just always thinking of things. And, I just thought colors are super fundamental. They're arguably like the most fundamental element of all art, which is kind of what NFTs are all about. Could argue like lines or shapes or something, but colors is like as fundamental as it gets. And there's a fixed number of colors in the digital color system that is used universally around the world, which is like this RGB model, and every color can be kind of represented by this 6-digit code called a hex code. It's like hashtag 0000FF is my blue, hashtag FF0000 is like pure red, and I could rattle off a bunch, but I probably don't need to. And so I just thought it was like in a sea of NFT collections that felt kind of pretty similar to one another. Maybe they have slightly different communities or different cultures or whatever, but it's kind of like a PFP collection for the most part, or some of them are just more art focused or whatever. But I just felt that this was substantially different. And when you start from a place of, what would an NFT collection for every color look like, and you realize that there's 16,777,216 colors, right there, you already have something that's extremely different from most NFT collections, which are like 10,000 pieces. This is going to be 16 million plus. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that the price per color isn't going to be $10,000 on average, like some of these big successful NFT collections. And it also means you're not going to mint out on the first day like a lot of NFT collections try to do. And all of these sort of differences emerged from the initial fundamental idea. And it's just one of those things where you start working on an idea and you can't necessarily know where it's going to go. But as I've been working on this, it just gets more and more interesting, and not like what do I think is the best thing to do, but actually like a correct decision continues to appear where I feel that there's a right and a wrong, and I try to do the right thing. And I just kind of keep building in the direction that I feel is right. And it was really exciting. With launching a week or two ago, people really felt what I felt about the project, and it really seemed to resonate a lot. And so I think there's a lot more that can be done with this. And so I don't want to make any promises or anything. I'm very, a lot of NFT projects set like these big roadmaps and expectations, and I don't want to do any of that, but I'm very excited about what we can do with base colors.
So minted a few colors myself, but so basically you go on to basecolors.com, find a hex code.
If you mess up and you go to .xyz, it redirects to .com. I was pretty pleased to be able to get both there.
That is peak UX right there, because I feel like I would have done that. And then the cool thing that I realized when I went to mint, I minted the peach color for taste yesterday or this morning. I can't remember. Wow, my memory.
It's a nice color, by the way.
Thank you. It is like kind of one of those colors I've been drawn to for a long time. But if you put it in a color that someone has already collected, does it let you know the ETH address or the address of the person who has that color, or am I dreaming?
No, you're right. So if there's a color picker on the website, like front and center, and you can either use like the slider and pick a color or whatever, or you can enter a hex code directly, like if you know exactly what color you want, or you can use like a color picker, like that eyedropper thing from a picture. You can find the hex code and then you can plug that in or whatever. So there's a bunch of ways to pick colors. And if you pick one that is taken, like for example, if you tried to get my blue, the preview of that color, instead of showing the color, it shows this like black and white crossed out square. And in the middle of that, it shows that it's owned by, XYZ ETH address. And that ETH address is clickable, so that if you really want the color, you can click the address, go to the OpenSea page and bid on the color. So if your color is taken, you can still bid on it, but unfortunately you can't get it for the mint price at that point.
I see. Once you mint, is there some sort of like community platform, or I hate this question, what's the utility behind this? Are you trying to onboard like the next million, or what's the, I don't know, short-term goal, let's say? Because I know you aren't planning for long term, you're kind of playing it by ear and seeing what's right. But yeah, what's the mission statement for this?
Yeah, the initial, rationale or reason to do it was really just because it was interesting, like I said. And I think this is still on the website. Like I basically said, we thought it was interesting and we believe interesting things are worth doing. And so that was sort of the initial catalyst. But since building it, I realized that I sort of got lucky with timing. Base is now about a year old, and Coinbase Smart Wallet came out about a month ago, which most people still don't realize is really a next generation wallet experience. Creating a wallet for most people until, in my view, a month ago was not really a feasible ask for someone like my mom, for example. But with Coinbase Smart Wallet, it's actually possible, and it's easy, and it takes 5 or 10 seconds. It's like a Face ID sort of thing. It feels like anything else you do on your phone. And so with that, we were able to make a much easier user experience than I would have expected, and sort of went all in on that once we realized that that was possible. And so with this sort of universally accessible experience and a universally appealing thing, which is colors, at a universally affordable price of $3, it became sort of natural to realize that this is a great mechanism for onboarding people into crypto for the first time. And so we sort of adopted that mission, and it's something that I genuinely believe in, that I think a world with crypto is better than a world without crypto. And to the extent that we can help drive mass adoption through colors, would love to do so. So the mission statement as of now is onboard, on-chain. And that wasn't the reason we started, but that's now the reason we're building, or at least one of the reasons we're building.
Love it. I understand you have a team building this, or is it just you?
So it started with just me, and then I found through Bountycaster on Warpcast, actually, a guy called Avinash, who has been an excellent teammate for me. And he's just building every day and absolutely getting after it. So go follow Avinash Nayak on Warpcast. He's a really underrated builder, and don't steal him from me. But other than that, he deserves your attention. And then Phil, who's very prominent on Warpcast as well. He and I have been friends for a while. And we had sort of a serendipitous conversation around the time I was starting. He wanted to take a walk for a full day, and he knew I was like a big walk guy. And so he reached out to me about taking a full day walk, and I base colors pilled him. And he ended up, helping with the launch of the project, really significantly working on the contract and everything. And he's got a ton of experience with NFT art from everything he's done with Bright Moments and otherwise. So those are the three for now. And we've also, it's been great. I found people on Farcaster who have been willing to build permissionlessly, and I can kind of just help guide if and as they want it. But I think base colors is like a great thing to build with and on top of. And so I'm hopeful that people will continue to do that permissionlessly, and hopefully can find people, to the extent that we do want more people working like sort of on the core thing, that would be how I would expect to find the next people.
That's a really awesome building story. And I think one of the most special things about building on Farcaster, like for a Farcaster audience, is that there is a very high concentration of really amazing builders, and they're not hard to find just because of infrastructure like Bountycaster, where it's so easy to put your idea out there and then see who resonates. And then, just start working with them like off the bat. It's crazy and it's really exciting. Have you been able to onboard your mum yet? Does she have a color?
Oh yeah, my mom was a big test user for us. Before we launched, obviously on mainnet and everything, I kept everything pretty under wraps, but I probably showed a dozen or two people. And out of those, let's call it 20 people, maybe 4 or 5 people had ever done anything in crypto before. Like I really wanted feedback from people who had never done anything in crypto before to make it as user-friendly as possible for everyone. And so I got great feedback from my mom, who had a difficult time with, creating a wallet before we cleaned things up for her. And then got, my fiance and some of her friends and some of my friends and whatever, and my brother who's not into crypto at all. He owns some Bitcoin and Ethereum, of course. I've already taken care of that with families and friends. But all of these people, no one had ever done anything on chain, and now they're all on chain, and they all own colors, and they've all named colors, and it's been great.
I love that. I love that story. First, you got to onboard your family on chain, and then that's the proof of concept for the rest of the world. Because I do think, like, once you start onboarding the mums, it's game over. We're all going on chain from there.
Exactly. You get the moms, you're good to go.
Exactly. I am so sad that we're running out of time. I did want to do a quick fire question, a set of questions. What do you think about reggaeton? You can answer in like one word or one sentence.
Reggaeton, just like reggae, the genre of music?
Like Bad Bunny, like what you hear in Miami on the streets every day.
Oh, yeah. I don't even see, that shows how informed I am. I don't even know what reggaeton is. I thought it was like Bob Marley or something. I would say I'm pro Bob Marley and, not a big fan of Bad Bunny.
Okay. What do you eat on your pancakes?
Chocolate chips and maple syrup, not like the Aunt Jemima's, but the good stuff.
Love it, the good stuff. Okay, would you rather go to a Taylor Swift concert or a royal family wedding?
I probably wouldn't be jumping at the bit for either, but royal wedding.
Okay, interesting. And this one, you can elaborate a little more. What's the worst piece of life advice you've ever received from someone?
Worst piece of life advice. I have this like recency bias, so I don't know if this is the worst thing ever, but I just saw something the other day, and I try not to comment when people say something online that I disagree with, because it just doesn't really go anywhere. Unless they're like a thoughtful person or someone I know, then it can be a productive sort of thing. But someone I didn't really know tweeted something around, if you're in a relationship and it's not serving you, you should leave right away. And I didn't really like that. I think relationships take a lot of work, and they benefit from that work, and they get stronger. And so that, I guess, was like a pretty general, like relationships are, talk about fundamental pieces of life, like health, wealth, happiness, and relationships. I put right up there with everything else. And I think if you just bail on every relationship, like when it gets tough, it's probably not the move. Having said that, I do think and sympathize with, if you have sort of a toxic relationship in your life, it's good to cut those out if and when the time comes. But it's not like a black and white, right when things get tough, exit. It's something that I think deserves some time and care. And if something is just relentlessly toxic and you're better off without it, then by all means, move on.
Love that. I'm with you there. I feel like for some reason it's our generation, Gen Z, or, people in their early 20s these days are very like, okay, it's not serving. Let's leave, move on, next one. And maybe it's a cultural thing, because back in the day, it was like, I guess, frowned upon to leave relationships, or I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but yeah, we definitely are a lot more impatient with building and maintaining relationships these days.
Yeah, I mean, now that you mentioned that, I actually think I was never a big dating app user myself. I was lucky to meet my fiance through, the old-fashioned way, but
What's the old-fashioned way?
well, just, serendipitously in
The
New
normal
York,
way.
basically. Yeah. But I think now that I hear you say that and like sort of reflecting back, it seems like this ability, where you start your relationships, arguably the most important relationship you'll ever have with like your significant other, on an app, swiping left or right, when it's that easy to just like swipe people away, maybe that sort of carries in further on relationships where it feels like it's just kind of a swipe away to, move on from that person.
100%. It's almost unbelievable how callous we can be about the people we meet and like the relationships we create. And I think, I don't know, like I've been quite off the grid for the last 3 years, and that's something that I've definitely felt and worked on as a person. On that note, what's one piece of life advice you'd give to someone in their, say, like early to mid-20s? Maybe they're unhappy with their job or they're looking for their next thing.
Yeah, I'm generally not like a huge fan of generalized life advice. Like when I mentioned life advice calls earlier, I spend those asking mostly a lot of questions, and it ends up being a very personalized thing where I don't go in with answers, but I kind of try to ask some questions and hear what they say, and then it kind of leads to usually them coming up with answers on their own. Having said that, I'm happy to answer the question. I think people don't trust their gut enough in general. People care too much about what other people think. I think, try to disregard what other people think and what other people do and what seems like the right thing to do or the thing that you should do. And just trust your gut and follow your interests and, trust. I love the Steve Jobs quote about the dots will connect in your future. Just kind of do the best thing you can and trust your gut and trust that even if you can't know what the best thing is to do, you might somehow know, and just go for it and see what happens. I think there's also an Alan Watts quote that I really love, which is basically, excuse this tangent, but it's basically like if you could dream any life that you wanted. Like me personally, I probably would have been like an NBA player and I would have been rich and all this amazing stuff. You just live the life of your dreams. And then you would wake up and you get told, okay, now you get to do it again. And you would say, okay, great. I'm gonna do the same thing. Like that was amazing. I'm gonna go do it again. And you do it again. And then the third time you get to do it again. And you're like, well, that was great again, but I want to change this up a little bit. And if you basically like keep running that on repeat forever and you get to live infinite lives, eventually you would probably just say, surprise me. I don't want to know exactly what's going to happen here. I've done all of these amazing lives. I just want to live a life of surprise. And that's what real life is. Like you don't know what's next and you can't say what it's going to be or predetermine. And you can try, you can go and you can work in investment banking and you can kind of look and like, as long as you don't get fired, you're going to be rich and whatever. You kind of can see what your life is going to be like. But I think that kind of defeats the purpose of what life is. I think life should be less predictable and more spontaneous. And, you're not supposed to know what's around the next corner, let alone 10 years in your future, and just trust it'll all work out and just go for it.
Wow. Jake, I don't think I've ever felt so inspired on a pod. I'm usually like hungry or like cracking up. I feel properly inspired. I think I could talk to you for days on a walk. Maybe we can go on a walk for like 7 days and just talk about life and philosophy.
Yeah, I'm a big walk and talk guy. And as per the Phil thing earlier, like I was very open to taking a full day walk. 7 days, we might need to like prepare with some food and water or something, but I'm not opposed.
Love it. Lastly, what do you kind of want to leave listeners with? What can they do to support your work? Where can they find you? And what's coming up next?
Yeah, the obvious plug is Base Colors. Go to basecolors.com, mint a color, name a color, tell your friends. But beyond that, if you just want to go to 0fjake.com, that's the number 0fjake.com. It's got links to my blog and my podcast and my Twitter and my Warpcast and Base Colors and life advice, and you can even email me if you want. And so go there, check some things out, and like I said earlier, just follow your interests. If nothing is interesting, just leave. But if something jumps out at you, read a blog post or listen to a podcast or buy some colors.
Love it. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the pod, Jake, and thank you for your time.
Likewise. Thank you, Kelly. This is a blast.